poor little girl is rushed to the hospital. Her brother dials 911. A millionaire CEO answers. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The autumn rain drummed mercilessly against the cracked sidewalk of downtown Cincinnati as 7-year-old Mia Rose Thompson clutched her little brother's hand tighter than ever before. Her small fingers, pale and trembling from both cold and hunger, intertwined with 6-year-old Lucas's as they huddled beneath the narrow overhang of Murphy's hardware store. The familiar gnawing pain in her stomach had become their constant companion over the past several months, but today something felt different. Something felt wrong. "I'm really hungry, Mia," Lucas whispered, his wide brown eyes searching the busy street for any sign of kindness from the endless stream of strangers hurrying past them without so much as a glance. His voice carried that particular tremor that came right before tears, and Mia knew she had to be strong for him, just like she always was. "I know, buddy. Mama said she'd bring us something good to eat after her double shift at Mel's Diner ends tonight." Mia's voice carried a maturity far beyond her 7 years, shaped by months of responsibility that no child should ever have to bear. Their mother, Sarah Thompson, worked grueling double shifts 6 days a week at the downtown diner, leaving before dawn and returning long after dark, leaving the children to navigate the unforgiving streets of Cincinnati on their own. The siblings had developed a careful routine over the past 8 months since they'd lost their small apartment. They knew which store owners might spare a kind word, which restaurants sometimes had leftover food, and which areas of the city were safest for 2 children alone. Today they had positioned themselves strategically near the back entrance of Tony's Italian restaurant, where the sympathetic head cook, Maria, occasionally slipped them paper bags containing leftover breadsticks, small containers of marinara sauce, or sometimes even complete meals that hadn't been picked up. "Maybe we should try the church again," Lucas suggested hopefully, remembering the warm meal and hot chocolate they'd received at St. Mary's 3 days ago when Father O'Brien had found them shivering in the church courtyard. "Sister Catherine said we could come back any time." Mia nodded thoughtfully. But as she took her first step toward the direction of the church, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through her chest like a bolt of lightning. She gasped audibly, her small hand flying instinctively to her heart as the world around her suddenly tilted sideways in a dizzying spiral. The familiar ache that had been growing progressively stronger each week suddenly felt completely different, urgent, terrifying, and overwhelming in its intensity. Mia, what's wrong?" Lucas's voice rose with unmistakable panic as he watched his sister's face drain of all color, leaving her looking almost ghostly pale. Her legs buckled beneath her like they were made of paper, and she collapsed heavily onto the wet pavement, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. Lucas immediately dropped to his knees beside her on the cold, wet concrete, his small hands shaking violently as he tried desperately to wake her up. "Mia! Please wake up. Someone help us, please. Somebody help my sister," he screamed into the indifferent crowd of pedestrians, but everyone continued walking past them with determined expressions, many assuming they were just another pair of homeless children playing dramatic games to get attention or money. The rain continued to fall steadily, soaking through their thin, worn jackets and making Lucas's attempts to rouse his sister even more desperate. Fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm him, Lucas suddenly remembered the bright red emergency phone he had spotted near the main entrance of Cincinnati General Hospital just 2 blocks away from their current location. With a determination that seemed impossible for someone so young, he somehow managed to scoop his unconscious sister into his thin arms. She felt impossibly light and fragile, like a delicate bird with broken wings, and began stumbling as quickly as he could manage toward the hospital. The automatic glass doors of Cincinnati General Hospital whooshed open with a mechanical hiss, as a seasoned emergency room nurse named Patricia spotted them immediately. She had been working in emergency medicine for over 15 years, and had developed an instinct for recognizing real emergencies versus false alarms. "Medical emergency," she called out urgently, rushing toward the children with the practiced efficiency that came from years of experience. "What happened here, sweetheart?" "She just collapsed and won't wake up," Lucas sobbed uncontrollably as the nurse gently but quickly took Mia from his trembling arms and carefully placed her on a waiting gurney that seemed to appear within seconds. pushed by another member of the medical team. "Please help her, she's all I have in the whole world." The emergency medical team immediately sprang into coordinated action with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. They quickly wheeled Mia through a set of heavy double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," but Lucas felt utterly lost and alone as they disappeared into a restricted area where he couldn't follow, no matter how much he wanted to stay by his sister's side. Standing alone in the sterile hospital hallway, overwhelmed by the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the sharp antiseptic smell of industrial-strength disinfectant that seemed to burn his nostrils, Lucas realized with growing panic that he desperately needed to call for help. But who could he possibly call? Their mother didn't have a phone because they couldn't afford one. They had no relatives that he knew of, no family friends, no neighbors who cared about them. The only telephone number Lucas knew by heart was the one that every American child learns from the earliest age, 911. With his hands still trembling from fear and adrenaline, he approached the busy hospital information desk where a kind-looking elderly volunteer was answering phones and directing visitors. "Excuse me," he said in his small voice. "Could I please use your phone? It's really important." The volunteer, whose name tag read Dorothy, immediately noticed his distressed state and the fact that he was soaking wet. "Of course, honey. Are you here alone?" "My sister's with the doctors. I need to call for help." His voice was barely above a whisper. Dorothy handed him the desk phone with a concerned expression. "Go ahead, sweetheart." 911, what's your emergency?" The professional voice belonged to Officer Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of the Cincinnati Police Department who was working the evening dispatch shift. She had handled thousands of emergency calls over her career, but something about the small, frightened voice on the other end immediately caught her attention. "Please help me," Lucas whispered, his voice breaking with emotion as he struggled to find the right words. "My sister Mia is really sick and the doctors took her away from me and I don't know what to do and Mama isn't here and I'm all alone and I'm scared." "Okay, honey. I need you to slow down and take a deep breath for me," Officer Williams said in the gentle, reassuring tone she used with frightened children. "You're doing great by calling for help. What's your sister's full name?" "Mia Rose Thompson. She's 7 years old and I'm Lucas Thompson and I'm 6 and we don't have anybody else to call." Across the bustling police station, billionaire CEO Robert Sterling was sitting in Detective Martinez's cramped office, reviewing security footage related to a minor break-in at one of his downtown office buildings, when those specific words drifted clearly across the room. Robert, who had built a technology empire worth over $12 billion through a combination of brilliant innovation and ruthless business acumen, suddenly felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Thompson. That was definitely his younger brother Michael's last name after the adoption when they were separated as children. And Mia Rose. Hadn't Michael mentioned in one of his last letters over 15 years ago that if he ever had a daughter, he wanted to name her after their beloved grandmother Rose? Robert had lost all contact with his younger brother Michael 15 years ago, after a bitter, devastating argument about money, family loyalty, and the direction of Robert's rapidly growing business empire. Michael had walked away from the Sterling fortune, legally changed his surname to Thompson to distance himself from the family name, and disappeared completely from Robert's life. Despite hiring some of the most expensive and skilled private investigators in the country for over a decade, Robert had never been able to find any trace of his brother or learn what had happened to him. "Officer Williams," Robert interrupted, rising quickly from his chair and walking toward her desk with urgent steps. "That child on the phone, can you get more specific information about their situation?" The experienced officer looked puzzled by the wealthy businessman's sudden intense interest, but continued her conversation with the frightened child. "Lucas, sweetheart, where is your mama right now?" "She works at Mel's Diner downtown on 5th Street. She's been working extra shifts every day since Daddy died in the car accident 2 years ago. She won't be done until really late tonight." Robert's hands began to shake uncontrollably as the pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Michael had died 2 years ago in a car accident? And these children, who might very well be his own niece and nephew, had been living on the dangerous streets while he lived in luxury just a few hundred miles away, completely oblivious to their existence and suffering. "We're coming to the hospital right now to help you," Officer Williams assured Lucas with genuine warmth. I want you to stay exactly where you are and keep that phone close by in case we need to call you back. Robert was already grabbing his expensive cashmere coat from the back of the chair. I'm coming with you to the hospital. This could be my brother's family. Detective Martinez looked up from his paperwork with surprise. Your brother? It's a long story, but if these are Michael's children, they're the only family I have left in the world. As they rushed through the city streets in the police cruiser with sirens wailing and emergency lights flashing, Robert's mind raced frantically through all the possibilities and implications. Could it really be Michael's children after all these years? And if so, how had they ended up homeless and desperate while he lived in his Manhattan penthouse, attended charity galas, and made business deals worth more money than most people could imagine? Cincinnati General Hospital's emergency room was buzzing with its usual evening activity when they arrived. Lucas sat alone on an uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting area, looking impossibly small and vulnerable in his wet clothes. When he saw the uniformed police officer approaching with a tall, well-dressed man in an expensive suit, hope flickered briefly in his tear-stained eyes. Are you Lucas? Officer Williams knelt down to his eye level with practiced kindness. I'm Officer Patricia Williams, and this is Mr. Robert Sterling. We're here to help you and your sister. Robert studied the boy's face with intense concentration, looking for any family resemblance. The thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, the distinctive shape of his nose, the way he held his shoulders with quiet dignity despite his obvious fear. It was exactly like looking at photographs of Michael at that same age. Lucas, can you tell me more about your daddy? What was his full name before he died? Michael Thompson. But Mama told me his real name used to be different when he was little, before he got adopted by nice people. She said he had a brother somewhere far away, but they didn't talk to each other anymore because of some big fight. The confirmation hit Robert like a devastating physical blow to his chest. These were definitely Michael's children, his own niece and nephew, and they had been surviving on the unforgiving streets for months while he lived in complete luxury, utterly unaware of their existence or their desperate circumstances. Where is your sister Mia right now? Robert asked, his voice thick with emotions he was struggling to control. A tired-looking doctor in wrinkled scrubs appeared from behind the emergency room doors, scanning the waiting area. Are you the family of Mia Thompson? Yes, Robert said without any hesitation, his voice firm and decisive. I'm her uncle, and this is her brother Lucas. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, a respected pediatric cardiologist with over 15 years of specialized experience treating the most complex childhood heart conditions, led them down a long, sterile corridor to a quiet consultation room. Her expression was gravely serious, and Robert could tell immediately that whatever she was about to share would not be easy to hear. She was the kind of doctor who had learned through years of practice how to deliver devastating news with compassion, while still maintaining the clinical precision that families needed to understand their options. Please have a seat, Dr. Hayes said gently, gesturing toward a group of cushioned chairs arranged around a small table. I need to explain Mia's condition to you, and it's quite serious. Lucas climbed into the chair next to Robert, unconsciously moving closer to this uncle he had just met, sensing that whatever was coming would be frightening. Mia has a severe congenital heart defect called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, Dr. Hayes began carefully, using her hands to illustrate as she spoke. Essentially, this means that the left side of her heart, which is responsible for pumping oxygen-rich blood to the rest of her body, never developed properly. It's severely underdeveloped and can't function the way it should. Robert felt the room begin to spin around him as the medical terminology washed over him. What does that mean for her survival? Without immediate surgical intervention, her prognosis is... Doctor. Hayes paused deliberately, glancing meaningfully at Lucas, who was listening with intense concentration. Not good. Children with this condition typically don't survive past early childhood without treatment. What kind of surgery does she need? Robert pressed, leaning forward in his chair. What are her chances if she gets the treatment? She needs a series of extremely complex heart operations called the Norwood procedure. It's actually 3 separate surgeries performed over several years. The first surgery alone costs approximately $200,000, and she'll need at least 2 more major operations over the next few years. The total medical costs could easily exceed $500,000, not including ongoing care, medications, and follow-up treatments. Money is absolutely not an issue, Robert said immediately, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems with financial resources. Whatever she needs, whatever it costs, just tell me what has to be done. Dr. Hayes looked genuinely surprised by his immediate response. Mr. Sterling, I should mention that Mia's condition has gone completely untreated for far too long. Most children with hypoplastic left heart syndrome receive their first corrective surgery within the first few days or weeks of life. At 7 years old, having lived with this condition for so long, the surgical risks are significantly higher than they would have been if we had caught this earlier. But there's still hope? Robert pressed urgently. There's still a chance we can save her? There's always hope, and we never give up on our patients. But I need to be completely honest with you about what we're facing. Even with the absolute best medical care available, her chances of surviving the first surgery are approximately 60%. Those aren't terrible odds, but they're not as good as we'd like them to be. Lucas had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up in his small voice. What happens if the surgery doesn't work? Dr. Hayes knelt down to his level. Lucas, your sister is going to need someone who can be with her through a very long and difficult recovery process. She'll be in the hospital for weeks, maybe months. Do you have other family members who can help take care of you both during this time? Lucas shook his head sadly. Just Mama, but she works all the time at the diner. We don't have money for doctors or hospitals or anything like that. Robert reached over and gently placed his hand on Lucas's shoulder. You have me now, Lucas. And I promise you, with everything I have, we're going to take care of your sister. We're going to give her every possible chance. For the next 6 intense hours, Robert made a series of phone calls that would fundamentally change everything about the children's lives. He contacted the most renowned pediatric cardiac surgeons in the entire country, arranged for Mia to be transferred via medical helicopter to Boston Children's Hospital, which had the best pediatric heart program in the world, and hired a private medical transport team to ensure she would be moved safely and with continuous monitoring. But more importantly than all the logistical arrangements, he began trying to understand exactly how his brother's family had fallen through every conceivable safety net and ended up living on the streets. Sarah Thompson finally arrived at the hospital just after midnight, still wearing her grease-stained diner uniform and smelling like coffee, fried food, and exhaustion. She was 36 years old, but looked at least a decade older, with deep worry lines etched around her eyes and calluses covering her hands from years of demanding physical labor. When she first saw Robert sitting in the waiting room, her face went completely white and she actually took a step backward. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "You look exactly like him. Like Michael when he was younger, before all the stress and worry aged him." "Sarah," Robert stood up immediately. "I'm Robert Sterling. I'm Michael's brother." "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Michael never stopped talking about you. Why didn't you contact me when Michael died?" Robert asked, struggling to keep any trace of accusation out of his voice. "I would have helped. I would have done anything to help you and the children." Sarah's laugh was bitter and filled with years of disappointment. "Contact you? Michael spent the last 5 years of his life trying desperately to reconnect with his family. He wrote dozens of letters, made countless phone calls, even hired lawyers to try to find a way to reach you. Your people told him repeatedly that you wanted absolutely nothing to do with him, that you had moved on with your life and preferred that he stay completely out of it." The words hit Robert like a physical sledgehammer blow to his chest. "That's absolutely impossible. I never received any letters from Michael. I hired private investigators for over 10 years trying to find him. I never stopped looking. Your personal assistant, a man named Charles Whitmore, told Michael personally that you had given explicit instructions for him to handle all family inquiries. He said you were building a new life and a successful business and that you didn't want any reminders of your difficult past." Robert's face darkened with a rage so intense it was almost frightening. Charles Whitmore had been his trusted personal assistant and confidant for 12 years, handling his most private affairs with what Robert had believed was complete loyalty and discretion. The thought that Charles had been deliberately intercepting his brother's desperate attempts to reconnect was almost incomprehensible in its betrayal. "Sarah, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I never knew Michael was trying to reach me. I never stopped looking for him, never stopped hoping we could reconcile. If I had known about you and the children, if I had known he needed help." "He never stopped loving you," Sarah continued, her voice breaking with emotion as years of suppressed grief came pouring out. "Even when he was dying in the hospital after the car accident, when he could barely speak, he kept telling me to find a way to contact you. He said his biggest regret in life was that you would never get to meet his beautiful children." Lucas, who had been quietly listening to this emotional conversation, suddenly spoke up with the directness that only children possess. "Mama, is this really Daddy's brother? The one from all the stories you used to tell us?" Sarah nodded, fresh tears starting to stream down her face. "Yes, baby. This is Uncle Robert, the one your daddy loved so much." The next morning, they prepared to fly to Boston in Robert's private jet, a luxury that none of them except Robert had ever experienced. Mia remained unconscious but medically stable, surrounded by sophisticated portable medical equipment, and attended by a specialized team of critical care nurses who monitored her condition constantly. Lucas pressed his small face against the airplane window, completely mesmerized by the view of clouds and landscape below. It was not only his first time flying, but his first time seeing the world from such a perspective. "Will Mia really get better?" Lucas asked Robert, his small hand naturally slipping into his uncle's much larger one as they sat together during the flight. "I'm going to do absolutely everything within my power to make sure she gets better," Robert promised solemnly. "And Lucas, you and your mama are going to come live with me in New York. We're family, and families take care of each other. That's what your daddy would have wanted." But Lucas looked uncertain and worried. "Mama always says that rich people sometimes make promises they don't really mean to keep. She says poor people learn not to trust too much because we get disappointed." The innocent words stung Robert deeply, because they contained the kind of hard-earned wisdom that came from experiencing repeated disappointment and broken promises. "Your mama is very smart to be careful about trusting people, but I want you to watch what I do, not just listen to what I say. Actions are always more important than words, and I'm going to prove to you that some promises can be kept." When they arrived at Boston Children's Hospital, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez was waiting for them. She was widely regarded as the leading pediatric cardiac surgeon in the entire country, with a reputation for successfully treating the most complex and challenging cases. After spending several hours examining Mia's extensive medical records and conducting her own thorough evaluation, she called Robert into her private office for a detailed consultation. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to understand exactly what we're facing with Mia's case. This is not going to be easy, and I believe in being completely honest with families about both the risks and the potential outcomes." Robert sat forward in his chair, bracing himself for whatever she was about to tell him. "Mia's heart has been working overtime for 7 full years, trying desperately to compensate for a severe defect that should have been addressed when she was an infant. Her heart muscle is significantly enlarged and weakened from this constant strain. The surgery we're proposing is extremely risky under these circumstances. What would happen if we choose not to operate? Without surgical intervention, she has perhaps 6 months to live, possibly less. Her heart is failing rapidly, and we can see the deterioration accelerating. And if we do proceed with the surgery, if she survives the operation, which, as I mentioned, is about a 60% chance, she'll face years of recovery, additional operations, and ongoing medical management. But if everything goes well, she could potentially live a relatively normal life, maybe even an active one." Robert looked through the window into Mia's room, where Lucas sat faithfully beside her bed holding her hand and reading aloud from a colorful picture book he had discovered in the children's library. "Doctor, if Mia were your own child, what would you do?" Dr. Rodriguez was quiet for a long, thoughtful moment. "Mr. Sterling, I'd fight for that 60% chance with everything I had, because the alternative is no chance at all, and every child deserves the opportunity to live and grow and discover what they're capable of." That evening, as they prepared for the surgery scheduled for the following morning, Robert sat with Sarah in the family waiting area, both of them exhausted but unable to sleep. The gravity of what lay ahead seemed to hang in the air between them, like a weight neither could ignore. Sarah, I want to do much more than just pay for medical bills, Robert said quietly, choosing his words carefully. I want to be genuinely part of their lives. I want to be the kind of uncle that Michael would have wanted me to be. The kind of uncle these children deserve. Sarah studied his face intently for several long moments, looking for any sign of insincerity or hidden motives. You're really serious about this, aren't you? You're not just going to write a big check and disappear when things get complicated or inconvenient? Sarah, I've spent the last 15 years of my life building a financial empire worth billions of dollars, but I've never built a real family. Maybe this is finally my chance to learn what Michael always understood instinctively, that some things in life matter infinitely more than money or business success. These children have been through more trauma and disappointment than most adults experience in a lifetime, Sarah warned. They don't trust easily, and they have every reason to be skeptical of adults who make big promises. If you're going to be part of their lives, you need to be prepared for the long haul, through good times and bad times. I understand. And I want you to know that this includes you too, Sarah. You're not just the children's mother, you're family now. You'll never have to work multiple jobs or worry about rent or medical bills again. You can focus entirely on being their mom. The next morning arrived with frightening swiftness. As the medical team prepared to wheel Mia into the operating room, she briefly regained consciousness and looked around with confusion at all the unfamiliar faces surrounding her. "Where's Lucas?" she asked weakly. "I'm right here, Mia," Lucas said immediately, moving closer to her bedside. "I'm not going anywhere." She managed a faint smile and squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "Take good care of Uncle Robert for me while I'm gone," she whispered. "He looks sad, and I think he needs a family just as much as we do." And then the medical team was wheeling her away, disappearing behind the imposing operating room doors that would determine whether their newly discovered family had any chance of a future together. The surgery stretched agonizingly into its 9th hour as Robert paced the family waiting room like a caged animal, unable to sit still or concentrate on anything other than what was happening behind those closed doors. He had negotiated billion-dollar business deals with more composure than he could muster, while waiting for news about his 7-year-old niece. Sarah sat curled in a corner chair, emotionally and physically exhausted from 48 hours without real sleep, while Lucas colored quietly at a small table, occasionally glancing hopefully toward the doors where his sister had disappeared. "Uncle Robert?" Lucas looked up from his careful coloring. "Do you think Mia can feel that we're all here waiting for her?" "I absolutely think she can feel all the love we're sending her way," Robert replied, though his own faith was beginning to waver with each passing hour of silence. A kind hospital volunteer approached their little group with sandwiches, coffee, and juice boxes. "Dr. Rodriguez and her surgical team are truly some of the best in the world," she said encouragingly. "She has a remarkable success rate with this type of complex procedure." Robert wanted to point out that every surgeon eventually encounters their first unsuccessful case, but he kept that dark thought to himself. Lucas didn't need to hear his uncle's fears voiced aloud. At exactly 4:23 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez finally emerged from the operating room, still wearing her surgical scrubs and cap. Her expression was carefully neutral as she approached the anxiously waiting family, and Robert felt his heart completely stop beating for several terrifying seconds. "The surgery was successful," she announced with evident relief, and Sarah immediately burst into tears of overwhelming gratitude. "We were able to complete the first stage of the Norwood procedure, and Mia's heart is responding well to the repairs. But I need to emphasize that we're not completely out of danger yet. The next 48 hours will be absolutely critical. Her body needs to fully accept the repairs we've made, and there's always a risk of complications during the immediate recovery period." "Can we see her?" Lucas asked immediately, not caring about anything except being reunited with his sister. "She's currently in the pediatric intensive care unit recovering from the anesthesia. I have to warn you, she looks quite intimidating with all the machines and monitors, but every single one of those machines is there to help her heal and get stronger. You can see her, but only for brief visits every few hours." When they were finally allowed into the PICU, Lucas gasped audibly at the sight of his sister surrounded by beeping monitors, breathing tubes, IV lines, and other medical equipment that seemed to dwarf her small body. But Robert noticed something else that filled him with hope. Despite all the intimidating medical technology, there was a peacefulness to Mia's face that hadn't been there before the surgery. The frightening bluish tint that had always colored her lips was completely gone, replaced by a healthy pink color that indicated her blood was finally carrying adequate oxygen. "She already looks so much better," Lucas whispered in amazement, gently touching her hand through the maze of medical equipment. Over the following month, Mia's recovery progressed steadily. She woke up on the 5th day with remarkable alertness, smiled brightly at Lucas when she saw him, and immediately asked for chocolate ice cream with sprinkles. By the end of the 2nd week, she was sitting up in bed for short periods. By the 3rd week, she was chatting animatedly with the nurses, and by the 4th week, she was demanding to know why everyone had been looking so worried about her. "I feel completely different," she told Robert during one of his daily visits, her voice stronger than he had ever heard it. "It's like I can finally breathe all the way down to my toes and my chest doesn't hurt anymore." "That's because your heart is finally working the way it was always supposed to work," Robert explained with a smile. "Pretty soon, you're going to be able to run and play and do all the things that other kids your age do." "Will you really teach me how to ride a bicycle?" she asked hopefully. "Daddy promised he would teach me someday, but then he had to go to heaven before we could do it." The simple, innocent request nearly broke Robert's heart completely. "I would absolutely love to teach you how to ride a bike, Mia. But first you need to get strong enough to come home with us to New York." "Where exactly is home going to be?" Mia asked with the directness that only children possess. Robert realized he hadn't fully explained all the changes that were coming to their lives. "Well, I have a large house in New York City with a big backyard and lots of rooms for everyone. Your mama and Lucas and I have been talking, and we'd all like you to come live there with us. Would you like that?" Mia considered this proposal with serious concentration. "Will mama still have to work so many hours every day?" "Oh, your mama won't have to work at all anymore unless she chooses to do something she enjoys. She can just focus on taking care of you and Lucas and being your mom. And you'll really be our uncle forever? Not just pretend or temporary? Really and truly forever. I'm your daddy's brother, which makes us family for the rest of our lives." But as Mia's physical recovery continued to progress remarkably well, Robert began to discover that his brother's children carried much deeper emotional wounds than just medical ones. Lucas had frequent nightmares about being alone and abandoned, and would wake up screaming for his sister in the middle of the night. Mia, despite her dramatically improved health, remained afraid to get too comfortable with nice things or promising situations, convinced that everything good would eventually be taken away from them. Sarah proved to be the key to understanding the full extent of their psychological trauma. "Robert, you have to understand what these children have been through," she explained one evening as they sat together in the hospital cafeteria, both too emotionally drained to go back to the hotel. "They've learned through hard experience that nothing good ever lasts in their lives. Every single time things started to get better, Michael got a promotion at work, we found a nicer apartment we could afford, whatever small improvement came our way, something would inevitably go wrong. Michael would get laid off without warning, or the landlord would suddenly raise the rent beyond what we could pay, or one of the children would get sick, and we'd have to choose between buying medicine and buying groceries. But all of that is over now," Robert insisted firmly. "They'll never have to worry about money or housing or medical care again. Money isn't the only thing they're worried about, though. They're terrified that you'll disappear from their lives just like their daddy did. They're afraid that this whole situation is temporary, that it's too good to be true." Robert understood that earning his niece and nephew's complete trust would require time, patience, and consistent actions rather than words. But he was absolutely determined to prove that some promises could indeed be kept, no matter what it took. 2 months after surgery, Mia was finally declared strong enough to leave Boston Children's Hospital. Robert had arranged for a luxury limousine to transport them to a penthouse hotel suite near the hospital, where they would stay for another 2 weeks, while Mia completed her outpatient recovery and follow-up appointments. But as they prepared to leave the hospital that had become their temporary home, Dr. Rodriguez pulled Robert aside for a private conversation that would change everything he thought he knew about his niece. "Mr. Sterling, there's something quite extraordinary that I need to share with you about Mia's case. Something I haven't mentioned to the family yet because I wanted to be absolutely certain of my findings. Robert felt his blood turn cold with worry. What kind of something? Is there a problem with her recovery? No, nothing like that. Her physical recovery is proceeding beautifully. But during the surgery, we routinely run comprehensive genetic tests, and we discovered something absolutely remarkable about Mia's genetic profile. What did you find? She has an extremely rare genetic mutation, the same mutation that unfortunately caused her heart defect. But it also endows her with some truly extraordinary cognitive abilities. Her brain processes information in ways that are fundamentally different from typical children her age. Different how exactly? Mr. Sterling, your niece has what we call an eidetic memory. She can recall visual information with perfect accuracy, but beyond that, she processes mathematical and logical concepts at what can only be described as a genius level. During her recovery, I've watched her solve complex puzzles and problems that are designed for teenagers and young adults. I've never seen anything quite like it in a 7-year-old. Robert stared at Dr. Rodriguez in complete amazement. Is this dangerous for her health? Will it affect her recovery or her heart condition? Not physically, no. But Mr. Sterling, your niece isn't just recovering from major heart surgery. She's also beginning to discover intellectual abilities that will make her one of the most gifted children in the world. The question you need to consider is, what are you going to do with this information? How are you going to help her navigate a world that may never quite understand what she's truly capable of achieving? As they drove away from Boston Children's Hospital toward their new life together in New York, Robert watched Mia chattering excitedly with Lucas about all the books she wanted to read and the things she wanted to learn when they reached their new home. He realized with crystal clarity that saving her life had been just the beginning of their journey together. Now he had to figure out how to help an extraordinarily gifted child develop her incredible potential while also giving her the normal, loving childhood that she deserved. But first, he had a very serious score to settle with Charles Whitmore, the man who had deliberately kept him separated from his family for 15 devastating years. The real confrontation was just beginning, and Robert Sterling was ready for war. The Sterling Manhattan penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming skyscraper overlooking Central Park. But as Robert carried sleeping Mia through the marble foyer for the first time, he realized that all his wealth couldn't prepare him for the challenge of healing traumatized children. Lucas walked slowly behind them, his small hand trailing along the imported Italian marble walls, eyes wide with disbelief at the opulent surroundings that now constituted their new home. "This is where we're going to live?" Lucas whispered, afraid to speak too loudly in case it might all disappear like a dream. "This is your home now," Robert confirmed gently, leading them to the wing he had hastily converted into a children's area. 2 bedrooms had been transformed by an army of interior designers working around the clock. One decorated in soft pastels for Mia, complete with a hospital-grade bed for her recovery, and another for Lucas featuring every book and educational toy money could buy. Sarah followed behind them, still wearing the same clothes she'd worn to the hospital 3 weeks ago, looking completely overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding them. "Robert, this is too much. We can't possibly accept all of this. You're family, Sarah. This is what family does for each other." But even as he spoke those words, Robert's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his head of security. "Charles Whitmore requesting immediate meeting. Says it's about family matters. Should I deny access?" Robert's jaw clenched with barely controlled rage. Charles had been with him since the early days of his company's growth, handling increasingly sensitive matters over the years. The thought that Charles might have been deliberately keeping him from his family was almost incomprehensible. "Schedule it for tomorrow morning," Robert typed back. "Conference room A, full security recording." The first few days in the penthouse revealed just how deep the children's psychological scars ran. Mia refused to sleep in the beautiful bedroom, instead curling up on the floor beside Lucas's bed, afraid to be separated from him, even by a few feet. Lucas hoarded food from meals, hiding crackers and fruit in his pockets, just in case they had to leave suddenly. Both children flinched whenever Robert raised his voice, even in normal conversation. Rachel Morrison, the child psychologist Robert had hired, explained during her initial assessment, "These children have developed survival mechanisms that served them well on the streets, but those same mechanisms will make it difficult for them to trust stability. Recovery isn't just about medicine, Mr. Sterling. It's about proving that safety can be permanent. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening with Mia. During her recovery at the penthouse, she had begun showing an unusual curiosity about numbers and patterns. Sarah noticed her daughter spending hours arranging objects in complex sequences, creating mathematical patterns with toys and household items. "Mia, sweetheart, what are you building?" Sarah asked one afternoon, finding her daughter surrounded by carefully arranged blocks and books. "I'm making patterns, Mama. See how if you arrange them this way, the sequence follows a rule? It's like music, but with numbers instead of sounds." Sarah and Robert exchanged concerned glances. While Mia had always been bright, this level of pattern recognition seemed unusual even for a gifted child. Dr. Morrison, when told about these observations, recommended gradual cognitive assessment. "Mr. Sterling, some children who experience medical trauma can develop enhanced focus in certain areas as a coping mechanism. Let's observe her natural interests before making any assumptions about her abilities." The next morning, Robert prepared for his confrontation with Charles Whitmore like a general preparing for battle. He had built his empire through strategic thinking and decisive action, but this felt personal in a way that business never had. Charles had stolen 15 years of family time that could never be recovered. Charles Whitmore arrived at Sterling Industries headquarters looking every inch the polished executive he'd always been. Perfectly tailored suit, silver hair immaculately styled, carrying the same leather briefcase he'd used for over a decade. But when he entered the conference room and saw Robert's expression, his confident demeanor faltered slightly. "Robert, thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this situation must be confusing." "Confusing?" Robert's voice was deadly quiet. "Charles, I want you to explain to me very carefully why my brother Michael spent 5 years trying to contact me, and I never received a single message." Charles had the decency to look uncomfortable, but his response was measured and calculated. "Robert, you have to understand the context. When your brother first started reaching out, your business was at a critical growth phase. You were working 18-hour days, expanding internationally, dealing with hostile takeover attempts. I made judgment calls about what deserved your immediate attention." "Judgment calls?" Robert stood up slowly, his hands flat on the conference table. "My brother was family. He was trying to reconnect, and you decided that wasn't important enough for my attention. He was asking for money, Robert. Every letter, every phone call, it always came back to needing financial assistance. I've seen how these situations play out. Family members who disappeared for years suddenly reappear when they hear about success and wealth. I was protecting you from being taken advantage of." The explanation only fueled Robert's rage. "So, you took it upon yourself to decide that my only remaining family member was just someone trying to take advantage of me? You never even told me he was trying to make contact." "I kept detailed records of every interaction," Charles said defensively, reaching into his briefcase. "I can show you exactly what he was requesting and when. I started receiving his calls about 7 years ago, and they became more frequent over time." "Show me." Charles spread a collection of documents across the table, copies of letters, phone logs, and detailed notes about conversations. As Robert read through them, his anger transformed into something much deeper and more devastating: profound grief. Michael's letters painted a picture of a man desperately struggling to provide for his family while battling serious health problems. The requests for money that Charles had characterized as gold digging were actually desperate pleas for help with medical bills for Mia's heart condition, rent money to avoid eviction, and basic necessities for his children. One letter, dated just 6 months before Michael's death, particularly gutted Robert. "Robert, I know we haven't spoken in years, and I know you probably think I'm just coming to you because I need something. Maybe that's true. But my little girl is sick, and I don't know where else to turn. The doctors say she needs surgery that costs more money than I'll make in 10 years. I'm not asking for charity. I'll work for you, sign any contract, do whatever you need. I just need help saving my daughter's life. She's beautiful, Robert. She has our grandmother's eyes, and she's so smart it sometimes takes my breath away. I wish you could meet her. I wish we could be brothers again. Michael." Robert's hands were shaking as he finished reading. He was trying to save Mia's life, and you blocked him from reaching me. I made decisions based on the information I had at the time, Charles said stiffly. I was trying to protect your interests. My interests? Robert's voice rose dangerously. My interests would have been helping my brother save his daughter and keeping my family together. Instead, Michael died thinking I had abandoned him, and his children spent months living on the streets while I had no idea they existed. The security footage would later show Robert maintaining his composure through sheer force of will, but inside, he was completely devastated. How many family dinners had he missed? How many birthdays, holidays, bedtime stories? How many opportunities to be the uncle that Michael had wanted him to be? Charles, you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and our legal team will be in touch regarding potential legal action for breach of fiduciary duty. Robert, please. I've worked for you for 12 years. Everything I did was in what I believed were your best interests. Get out. After Charles left, Robert sat alone in the conference room for over an hour, reading through every letter Michael had written. The portrait that emerged was of a man who had never stopped loving his brother, never stopped hoping for reconciliation, never stopped believing that family mattered more than money or pride. When Robert finally returned to the penthouse that evening, he found Mia sitting at the kitchen table working with educational specialists that he had hired to assess her learning patterns. She looked up from a complex puzzle she was solving and smiled at him. "How was your day, Uncle Robert?" she asked. "Complicated," he admitted. "How was yours?" "Good. Dr. Cole gave me some interesting problems to work on. Look at this one. It's about how to arrange resources most efficiently. I think I found a pattern that makes it work better." Sarah looked up from where she was preparing dinner. The specialists are amazed by how quickly she picks up new concepts. They say she has an unusual way of seeing solutions. Dr. Morrison had been right about Mia needing specialized assessment. But Robert was determined to handle this carefully, ensuring that any recognition of her abilities wouldn't overshadow her need to simply be a child. 3 months after moving into the penthouse, the Sterling family, as they had begun calling themselves, had settled into a routine that balanced luxury with healing. Sarah had enrolled in college courses she'd always dreamed of taking. Lucas was thriving in a progressive private school that celebrated individual learning styles, and Mia was working with educational specialists who were carefully assessing her unique learning patterns, while Dr. Morrison helped her process the emotional trauma of her early years. It was during a routine family meeting with Mia's educational team that everything changed in a way none of them could have anticipated. "Mr. Sterling," said Dr. Patricia Cole, the cognitive specialist they had hired, "we've completed our assessment of Mia's learning patterns. The results are quite remarkable." "What kind of remarkable?" Robert asked, sensing this was significant. "Mia demonstrates exceptional pattern recognition and mathematical reasoning abilities. However, what's most interesting is how she applies these skills practically. When we presented her with various problem-solving scenarios, she consistently found innovative solutions." Dr. Cole pulled out a folder of test results. "For example, we gave her a complex logistics puzzle involving resource allocation, something typically used for business school students. Her approach was not only correct, but more efficient than the standard solution." "What does this mean practically?" Sarah asked. "It means Mia has the type of analytical mind that could be very valuable in business or scientific research. But she's still 7 years old, so we need to nurture these abilities while ensuring she has a normal childhood." Robert leaned forward with interest. "Could she potentially help with real business problems?" "In an age-appropriate way, of course. Possibly, but only if she shows genuine interest and only as a fun challenge, never as pressure or expectation." A few weeks later, Robert decided to test Dr. Cole's assessment in a controlled way. He was facing a particularly challenging business decision about a potential acquisition, and thought it might be interesting to see how Mia approached the problem. "Mia," he said one evening during family time, "I have a puzzle that might interest you. I'm trying to decide whether to buy a company, but it's complicated. Would you like to hear about it?" Mia looked up from the mathematical games she'd been playing with Lucas. "What kind of company?" "They make special computers that work differently from regular computers, but some of my advisors think there might be problems with how they work. Would you like to see the basic information?" Robert had prepared a simplified version of the technical specifications, removing complex jargon, but maintaining the core logical structure of the problem. Mia studied the papers for about an hour, occasionally asking clarifying questions about terminology. Finally, she looked up with a concerned expression. "Uncle Robert, I think your advisors might be right to be worried." "What makes you say that?" "Well, look at this part here." She pointed to a section about error rates. "They're saying their computers will get better as they get bigger, but the math doesn't work out that way. When you have more parts, usually you have more things that can go wrong, not fewer." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. The acquisition in question was worth $3 billion, and Mia had identified the same concern that was troubling his most senior technical advisors. "Mia, that's a very good observation. What do you think we should do? Maybe ask them to prove their math with a smaller test first, like if I said I could build a tower of blocks that gets more stable as it gets taller, you'd want to see me build a small one first, right?" The simple analogy captured exactly what Robert's technical team had been trying to articulate for weeks. Robert immediately called his chief technology officer, Dr. Harrison Webb, who had been leading the technical evaluation team. "Harrison, I need you to review our quantum computing analysis. Specifically, I want you to test their technology at small scale before we proceed with full implementation." "Robert, we've been having the same concerns." "What's prompting this review?" "Let's just say I got some valuable perspective from an outside consultant who thinks like a child, literally." 2 days later, Dr. Webb called back with a relieved voice. "Robert, your instinct was right. When we tested their approach at smaller scale first, the error rates were much higher than projected. We caught a potentially catastrophic problem before full implementation. How much did this save us? Potentially hundreds of millions in failed deployment costs. I don't know who your consultant was, but they just saved us from a massive mistake." Robert hung up the phone and looked at Mia, who was quietly helping Lucas with a jigsaw puzzle at the kitchen table. His 7-year-old niece had used simple, logical thinking to identify a multi-million-dollar mistake that teams of experts had nearly missed. "Mia," he said carefully, "your advice just helped us avoid a very expensive problem." She looked up from the puzzle with the same expression she might use when asked about her favorite color. "Really? That's good. Sometimes when things seem too complicated, it helps to think about them like simple things you already understand." Word of the 7-year-old consultant behind Sterling Industries' recent success began to spread quietly through the tech industry, though Robert was careful to protect Mia's privacy and normal childhood development. "Uncle Robert," Mia said one evening as they sat together in his study, "I know people think I'm different because I understand things other kids don't. You are special, Mia, but that doesn't mean you can't also be a normal kid." "But what if I don't want to be special all the time? What if I just want to play and have fun?" The question revealed the struggle that gifted children often face, the burden of abilities that set them apart from their peers. "Mia, being smart doesn't mean you can't also be a child. You can play with toys, watch cartoons, learn to ride that bicycle I promised to teach you. Your gifts are just one part of who you are. Do you think Daddy would be proud of me? Your daddy would be incredibly proud of you, not just because you're brilliant, but because you're kind and brave, and because you take care of the people you love." But as Mia's reputation grew, so did unwanted attention. Robert began receiving calls from universities offering full scholarships, tech companies wanting to recruit her, and media outlets demanding interviews with the child genius of Wall Street. "We need to be very careful about how we handle this," Dr. Morrison warned during one of their sessions. "Mia is still a 7-year-old child who's recovering from significant trauma. The last thing she needs is to become a public spectacle or to feel pressure to perform for other people's expectations." The answer to this dilemma came from an unexpected source. "Lucas." "Uncle Robert," Lucas said one night as Robert was tucking him into bed, "I know everyone thinks Mia is super special because she's so smart. She is special, but so are you, Lucas. I know, but here's the thing. Mia was always the smartest person I knew, even before we came here. But she was also the best big sister. She shared her food with me when we were hungry. She made up stories to help me not be scared. She took care of me when I was sick. Being smart is just what she does. Being kind is who she is. Lucas's wisdom provided the framework for the decision Robert ultimately made. Instead of sending Mia to specialized programs or pushing her toward academic acceleration, he created a balanced environment where she could explore her intellectual interests while still experiencing the joy and wonder of childhood. They hired tutors who could challenge her academically, but they also enrolled her in art classes, music lessons, and sports activities with children her own age. She worked on complex problem-solving in the morning and learned to ride a bicycle in the afternoon. She consulted on business decisions and then played board games with Lucas before bedtime. This approach is unusual, Dr. Morrison admitted, but it seems to be working. Mia is developing normally in all areas: social, emotional, and intellectual. She's learning that her gifts are tools she can use to help people, not performance requirements that define her worth. But the most important validation came from Mia herself. "Uncle Robert," she said one evening after successfully completing her first solo bicycle ride around Central Park, "I'm glad you didn't send me away to those special schools." Why is that? Because being smart isn't the most important thing about me. Being part of this family is. 1 year after that desperate 911 call had changed everything, the Sterling family gathered in the penthouse for a celebration that would have seemed impossible just 12 months earlier. Mia had not only survived her heart surgery, but was thriving beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Her latest cardiac checkup had shown perfect heart function, and Dr. Rodriguez had officially declared her fully healed. "It's remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez had told them during the appointment. "Mia's heart is functioning better than most children who never had any problems at all. She's going to be able to live a completely normal, active life." But the celebration was about more than just medical success. Over the past year, the Sterling family had become exactly that. A real family, bound not just by blood but by love, trust, and shared experiences. Lucas had blossomed in his new school, making friends easily and discovering a talent for creative writing that surprised everyone, including himself. His short stories, filled with adventures and magic, revealed an imagination that had been nurtured by years of creating hopeful fantasies during the darkest times of their lives. Sarah had completed her first semester of college with perfect grades, pursuing the education she had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. More importantly, she had rediscovered the joy of simply being a mother, without the constant stress of wondering how to keep her children fed and safe. "I wake up every morning and for just a moment I forget that this is real," Sarah told Robert one evening as they watched Mia help Lucas with his homework. "Then I remember that my children are safe and healthy and loved, and I feel grateful in a way that's almost overwhelming." But it was Mia who had perhaps changed the most dramatically. The frightened, sickly child who had collapsed on a Cincinnati sidewalk had transformed into a confident, joyful 7-year-old whose brilliant mind was matched by her generous heart. Her work with Sterling Industries had continued, but always on her own terms, and only when it interested her. She had helped solve 3 major technological challenges, saving the company millions of dollars and establishing Sterling Industries as a leader in quantum computing innovation. But she had also learned to play piano, mastered chess, and become an expert at making pancakes shaped like animals for weekend breakfast adventures. "The most important thing we've discovered," Dr. Morrison explained during their final therapy session, "is that Mia's intellectual gifts don't make her different from other children in the ways that truly matter. She wants to be loved, to feel safe, to play and learn and grow. Her extraordinary abilities are just tools she can use to explore the world, not barriers that separate her from normal childhood experiences." But the most profound transformation had been in Robert himself. The driven, sometimes ruthless businessman had discovered that building a family was infinitely more rewarding than building an empire. "You know," he told his board of directors during a particularly contentious meeting about quarterly projections, "there are things in life that matter more than maximizing shareholder value. I've learned that from 2 children who taught me what real wealth actually looks like." The revelation that would define their future came during a quiet Sunday afternoon, when Mia was working on what she called her big project, a comprehensive analysis of global poverty that she had been developing for months. "Uncle Robert, I've been thinking about something important," she said, looking up from the complex charts and graphs she had created. You have all this money, and I have these problem-solving abilities. What if we use them together to help kids like Lucas and me? What do you mean? There are thousands of children living on the streets right now just like we were. Some of them are sick and can't get medical care. Some of them are really smart but can't go to school. What if we started a foundation that found these kids and helped them? The idea was both simple and revolutionary. Using Mia's analytical abilities to identify the most effective intervention strategies, combined with Robert's financial resources and business expertise, they could create a foundation unlike anything that had ever existed. We could call it the Michael Thompson Foundation, Mia continued thoughtfully. After Daddy, he always said that the most important thing you could do was help people who couldn't help themselves. Over the following months, they developed what would become the most innovative and effective child welfare foundation in the country. Mia's mathematical models identified optimal resource allocation strategies, while her intuitive understanding of what vulnerable children needed informed every program they created. The foundation's approach was revolutionary. Instead of simply providing temporary aid, they created comprehensive support systems that addressed medical care, education, housing, and family reunification. Mia's algorithms could predict which interventions would be most effective for each individual child, dramatically improving success rates. "It's incredible," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric social worker they hired to run the foundation's operations. Most foundations have success rates of maybe 30 to 40% in terms of creating lasting positive change. Your models are showing success rates of over 80%. It's not really about the mathematics, Mia explained during the foundation's first annual board meeting, addressing a room full of adults with the same confidence she brought to family dinner conversations. It's about understanding that every child is different, and what works for one kid might not work for another. You have to look at the whole picture: their health, their family, their community, their dreams. The foundation's first major success story came just 6 months after its launch. They identified a 9-year-old girl named Carmen Rodriguez, living in foster care in Chicago, who was showing signs of exceptional mathematical ability, but was struggling in the traditional education system. Using Mia's educational framework, they created a customized program that challenged Carmen intellectually while providing the emotional support she needed. Within a year, Carmen was working at a high school level in mathematics while still enjoying age-appropriate social activities with her peers. "The beautiful thing about what we're doing," Robert reflected during a foundation gala where they were announcing their first-year results, "is that we're not just changing individual lives, we're creating a model that other organizations can replicate. Mia's innovations could potentially help millions of children worldwide." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a quiet family dinner, when Lucas made an observation that surprised everyone. "You know what I think?" he said, looking around the table at his sister, mother, and uncle. "I think Daddy can see us right now, and I think he's really happy." "Why do you think that?" Sarah asked gently. "Because we're all together, and we're helping other kids like us. That's what Daddy would have wanted. He always said that family wasn't just about the people in your house. It was about taking care of anyone who needed taking care of." Mia nodded thoughtfully. "I think Lucas is right. And I think Daddy would be proud that we turned something really sad into something really good." As they sat together in their beautiful home, healthy and safe and surrounded by love, Robert reflected on the chain of events that had brought them together. A desperate phone call from a frightened 6-year-old boy had revealed not just a family he never knew he had, but a purpose he never knew he needed. "You know," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze Mia's hand, "sometimes the most important calls you'll ever receive are the ones you never expected to get." Mia squeezed back with the same strength that had carried her through heart surgery, homelessness, and the discovery of abilities that set her apart from every other child in the world. "Uncle Robert," she said with a smile that could light up the entire city, "I'm really glad Lucas called 911 that day. Not because I was sick, but because it brought us all home to each other." Outside the penthouse windows, the lights of New York City twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the distance another child might be making a desperate phone call, hoping for help that seemed impossible. But thanks to the Michael Thompson Foundation and the love of a family that had found each other against all odds, That help was no longer just a hope. It was a promise. The 911 call that had changed everything was just the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles begin with the simplest act of reaching out for help. And in a penthouse high above Central Park, a little girl who had once collapsed on a city sidewalk was now changing the world, one brilliant idea at a time, surrounded by the family who loved her not because she was exceptional, but because she was theirs. The Sterling family had learned the most important lesson of all, that real wealth isn't measured in dollars or achievements, but in the love you share and the lives you touch along the way. Their story had just begun.